At 4:57 a.m., December 12, 2025, Moscow thought it was experiencing another quiet winter morning. Snow drifted over empty highways, streetlights flickered against the frozen river, and the capital's air defense grid hummed with its usual overconfidence. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But 20 minutes earlier, far beyond Russia's border, something had already begun. A Ukrainian satellite relay recorded a narrow corridor of heat signatures rising from an underground runway near Vinnytsia. Two aircraft, silent and cold enough to blend with the night sky, lifted off without external lights. By the time Russian radar swept the sky, the jets were gone. Their signatures melted into the background noise. They were MiG-29 Spirals, Ukraine's most secretive modification of a decades-old airframe. And on this morning, they carried a mission unlike anything attempted since the war began. You will understand why in a moment. At 5:03 a.m., the first clue that something was wrong appeared not in Moscow, but in the Bryansk forests. A Russian border radar operator noticed a single flicker on his screen, a blip that twitched, froze, then disappeared. He logged it as atmospheric distortion. 37 seconds later, another flicker appeared, then 3, then 9. Before he could raise the alarm, the grid around him went dark. Across 3 Russian air defense zones, sensors began failing one by one. Screens pixelated. Calibration formulas froze. Data lines stalled. A complete interruption. But it was not a cyber attack. It was something far more physical, far more deliberate. Ukraine's first wave was entering. 50 long-range FPV drones, modified with acoustic shielding and low-signature prop systems, swept across the border at only 39 meters above the tree line. Their engines sounded like wind. Branches barely trembled beneath them. Within 2 minutes, they split into 4 clusters and vanished into Russian airspace. Not a single border unit reacted. Not a single operator fired. Inside Moscow's main air defense headquarters, the shift commander reviewed the incoming telemetry. It showed nothing. A perfect calm. But that calm lasted only until 5:11 a.m., when the first early warning node outside Mozhaisk suddenly reported an anomaly. A cluster of objects flying too low, too quiet, too stable to be birds. Officers leaned over their screens, then the cluster split, then it multiplied. Every radar beam scanned the corridor again. Nothing. For the first time since the invasion began, Moscow did not know what was coming toward it. And in the next 3 minutes, the capital would learn something it had never admitted to itself. Its billion-dollar shield had a weakness, and Ukraine had found it. Stay with me, because the reveal happens faster than anyone in the Kremlin could react. And if you want more breakdowns like this, hit subscribe so you never miss an update. At 5:14 a.m., the Russian 2nd Air Defense Division finally saw what they feared most. Not missiles, not jets, but something harder to track. Something that moved like a single organism. The first FPV cluster rose from the tree line, then instantly dropped again, confusing altitude sensors that were never designed for threats this small or this quiet. Operators shouted overlapping commands. Screens flickered in red. Telemetry spiked, then vanished. One officer slammed his palm on the console and yelled for a system reboot. Another tried to recalibrate the antenna array. But the drones were already past their scanning arc before the system even attempted to restart. Ukraine had tested this tactic for 5 months in classified training zones. The key was timing. The swarm did not fly straight. It pulsed, dispersing and rejoining, creating a false radar signature that mimicked weather distortion. When the Russians attempted to lock onto the fastest object, the cluster slowed. When they switched to the slowest object, it accelerated. When they tried to track all of them, the drones scattered into unpredictable vectors. And this was only the first wave. At 5:16 a.m., Pantsir crews east of Mozhaisk received permission to fire. 32 missiles arced into the sky, leaving white trails over the frozen fields. The explosions lit the horizon like lightning. 20 Ukrainian drones disintegrated instantly. But here is the moment everything flipped. Instead of collapsing, the swarm reorganized. The remaining units switched to autonomous pattern 2. They dived to 27 meters, skimming the ground so closely that snow rippled beneath them. Russian radar could no longer track them. Even thermal signatures were useless because the drones cycled their heat output every 2 seconds, blending with the ambient background. By 5:18 a.m., Moscow's outer defense ring was overwhelmed by contradictory data. Operators saw 8 signals, then 3, then 14. Some targets moved backward, some froze in midair, some duplicated. Officers shouted across the room, but every answer contradicted the last. And then the losses began. Cluster 1 reached the Odintsovo radar complex, one of the oldest surveillance stations guarding Moscow's western approach. 4 Ukrainian drones rose almost vertically and detonated in a synchronized arc. The blast tore through antenna arrays, melted radar panels, and dropped the entire station offline in under 2 seconds. Seismic sensors miles away recorded the blast wave. Cluster 2 hit Bitsa Park Station, shredding its secondary relay dish and knocking out communications for the first time in 12 years. Russian technicians who tried to reroute the signal found nothing. Every backup line was burned through. Moscow was blind, not theoretically, not partially, completely. And this blindness opened a corridor no pilot had ever flown through. At 10,000 meters, 2 Ukrainian MiG-29 Spirals glided into Moscow's main air corridor without triggering a single alert. The capital still believed the attack was over. It had no idea the real strike had not even begun. At 5:41 a.m., the skies above Moscow were a muted gray curtain, still untouched by sunrise. Beneath that haze, a city of 12.7 million slept, unaware that 2 Ukrainian fighters were already approaching the heart of its military command. The MiG-29 Spirals did not fly like normal jets. Their stealth coating swallowed search beams. Their heat signature mimicked migratory birds. Their digital camouflage shifted tones every 4 seconds to blend with cloud cover. On Russian radar, they appeared as noise, nothing more. Inside the cockpit of White Spear 1, the pilot received a short encrypted transmission from Kiev. Phase 2 authorized, priority target locked. The target was the NDCC, the National Defense Management Center, the war brain of the Russian Federation, a fortress of reinforced steel, buried command tiers, and overlapping air defense nodes worth $9.4 billion. For years, Russian state media had called it untouchable. That myth was about to collapse. At 5:43 a.m., White Spear 1 descended to 1,900 meters, approaching the western perimeter of the NDCC. Its radar warning receiver glowed, detecting the Kasuka 4 electronic warfare station that shielded the command center from hostile targeting. The pilot squeezed the trigger. A KH-31P anti-radiation missile launched with a burn so bright that it split the cloud layer open for a second. The missile struck dead center. The blast temperature soared above 1,100 degrees, vaporizing conduits, servers, and the EW core that protected the NDCC. 2 underground floors collapsed. Heat sensors across Moscow lit up red. Before Russian units could respond, White Spear 2 began its attack run. At 5:44 a.m., 2 R-77 precision strike missiles dropped toward the NDCC's hidden reserve bunker. Few outside Russia even knew this facility existed. It stored fuel, encrypted data, and emergency command lines for the Russian military. Both missiles struck within 0.7 seconds. Fuel ignited. A reinforced tunnel ruptured. A column of concrete dust and twisted metal spiraled 60 meters into the sky. Shards rained across the Moscow River embankment. Shock waves shattered windows across a dozen government buildings. FSO security units opened fire at the sky, but the MiGs were already climbing, slipping back into the smoke they had created. By 5:47 a.m., the NDCC reported catastrophic losses. 11 personnel dead, dozens critically injured, thousands of emergency calls pouring in, traffic collapsing across major highways, families evacuating on foot, a command center choking in black smoke. At 5:50 a.m., a quiet confirmation traveled from Kyiv to every major capital on Earth. The NDCC is no longer untouchable. The war had changed, and Moscow had only minutes to understand what that meant, because the worst part was still ahead. By 6:10 a.m., smoke drifting over the Moscow River had turned sunrise into a dull copper haze. Sirens rolled across the city, bouncing between the Kremlin towers and the damaged blocks along the embankment. The two MiG spiral strikes had taken less than 4 minutes, yet the consequences were spreading like fractures through glass. Power grids flickered, traffic signals died, metro lines froze between stations. Moscow, a city built on constant movement, was slowing to a crawl. Inside the Kremlin command bunker, the first confirmed intelligence reports arrived at 6:12 a.m. The Kasuka 4 electronic warfare hub that protected the NDCC's western flank was gone. The reserve command bunker beneath the eastern wing was still burning. Fuel stores ruptured. Data tunnels collapsed. Walls as far as 1.7 kilometers away had cracked. Worst of all, for 7 minutes, every tactical radio used by FSO security returned nothing but static, a complete communication vacuum at the heart of the Russian state. By 6:19 a.m., the wider picture emerged. 3 emergency coordination centers were offline. 2 metro lines stalled with over 1,800 passengers trapped in darkness. 42 hospitals switched to unstable backup power. Chemical suppression systems misfired inside Kremlin archival corridors and flooded entire halls with foam. Mobile networks collapsed across multiple districts. More than 800,000 residents lost all connectivity. Outside, panic spread across Moscow. Parents carried children through ash-filled streets. Police tried to direct traffic with hand signals alone. Roads in Tverskaya, Tagansky, and Kamovniki were sealed after inspectors found structural weaknesses caused by shock waves. Social media exploded with videos of smoke over the river and crowds running across bridges. State television delivered only a short 26-second message about a localized technical incident. The silence only amplified fear. Then came the moment that changed everything. At 7:04 a.m., the Kremlin's strategic command chamber lost power. Only 42 seconds, but enough to expose the truth. The digital map of Moscow, normally glowing with surveillance layers, radar lines, and live sensor grids, turned into a blank white screen. Every radar node offline. Every uplink silent. No air picture. No incoming data. A general whispered the sentence no one wanted to hear. "We do not know if the aircraft have left or if they are above us." Arguments erupted. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others warned that firing blind could trigger disaster. Then the final blow came. 11 Moscow air defense units had failed due to total data loss. A $9.4 billion shield defeated by drones worth $1.3 million and 2 aircraft older than many of the officers in the room. When the emergency meeting ended, no one spoke. They simply stared at the dead screens, realizing the same thing. Moscow's invincibility was a myth, and the world had just watched it disappear. If you have theories on how Russia will respond, or how this moment reshapes the war, drop them in the comments. I want to see your take. Stay sharp, stay subscribed, and I'll see you in the next report.